Welcome, welcome to the evening show with Jackie Brambles, where tonight we are celebrating the 38th anniversary of the legendary Live Aid gig that took place on the 13th of July 1985 in both London and Philadelphia. So where were you when this happened?
It's 12 noon in London, 7 a.m. in Philadelphia. And around the world, it's time for Live Aid. 16 hours of live music in aid of famine relief in Africa. Wembley welcomes their Royal Highnesses, the Prince and Princess of Wales.
I was 18. It was the summer holidays. Me and my mates just wandered between our houses to watch the whole thing from start to finish. The sun was shining and it just seemed like the most exciting thing we'd ever seen in our lives. For the next hour, we will rattle through that 16-hour musical marathon, stopping off for a natter along the way with some of the artists from both sides of the Atlantic. And of course, our soundtrack tonight is all Live Aid, all the time. But right now, let's go back to the start of that historic day. Status Quo had been picked to go on first at Wembley. So cue the obvious question to Francis Rossi. Was that very nerve-wracking for you?
Well, beforehand it wasn't, because none of us older acts, and we've always been one of the older acts, we didn't think it was going to be anything. No one, it was kind of, Bob, what are you on about? And it wasn't until we walked on, which is one of the reasons we accepted to go on first. We'll be done in 15 minutes, off by 12:15, finished, gone. We didn't realise it was going to be that big that you couldn't get out and you had to fly out and all that stuff. So we went on, came off, and I don't remember seeing Rick for the rest of the day or Alan the rest of the day. I didn't see anybody the rest of the day. And I just sort of sat around. I don't really remember. I was drinking at the time. I don't remember much about it.
Status Quo kicking off Live Aid with Rockin' All Over the World. That was followed by the Style Council, then Bob Geldof and his Boomtown Rats, followed by Adam Ant, and then it was the turn of Ultravox. Midge Ure was a very busy man that day, of course, as he, along with Bob Geldof, had basically organised Live Aid. And he spoke to me about the challenges he realised the artists were having to face on the day, himself included.
Live Aid, as I said, no sound check. You don't really hear what you're singing, and it's very easy to sing sharp or flat when you can't really hear yourself. And we were lucky, I think. The audience were phenomenal. The audience sang along with it, which was great, and they also clapped the drum beats at the beginning of the song, which was fabulous. You know, had it been a cold audience or a distant audience, it might not have come off so well. But when you see the audience are on your side, you know, wanting you to do well, you kind of step up to the mark. So yeah, I think a lot of luck and a lot of, you know, keeping your bum cheeks clenched to make sure that you could actually do it. You know, going for those high notes when you're, especially in the afternoon. You know, I think that I think people sing better. People sing better when it's dark for some reason, and in the cold light of day at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it's not the time to go out there singing Vienna first thing. You know.
Ultravox with Vienna. That was followed by a video contribution from our Japanese friends, during which time Spandau Ballet were setting up on stage. And we'll be right back with Martin Kemp's memories of that incredible day next. Welcome back to the evening show with Jackie Brambles, where tonight we are celebrating the 38th anniversary of the most spectacular, magnificent mashup of musicianship and humanity, which resulted in the once-in-a-lifetime legendary gig that was Live Aid. Now, next up, it was Spandau Ballet's turn to take to the Wembley stage, featuring, of course, Greatest Hits Radio's own Martin Kemp. Was it a magical day, you know, for the people concerned backstage, or was it just sort of chaotic?
It was a funny one that day, because it was the only kind of event I've ever been involved in that was historical at the moment. You knew that 2 billion people around the world were watching it, right? You knew it was to become historical. Because most things are only historical in retrospect, aren't they?
Yep.
You know, when you look back at them. You know, especially things in pop culture. But that day was different. we all knew what was happening that day. We all knew that that day was going to change the face of charity, the way it looked. We all knew that that day bands couldn't hide from each other ever again. And so it was different. We kind of knew how big it was that day while we were doing it, which was an incredible experience.
Spandau Ballet with True, which completed their set at 2 o'clock, which was when the JFK Stadium in Philadelphia opened for business. A complete unknown called Bernard Watson opened that show. He was a high school kid who'd slept outside the venue all night with big dreams of becoming a pop superstar. He begged the head honcho there for a chance to play, and incredibly, they gave it to him. I wonder where Bernard is now. But then on came the first big American act. That was Joan Baez. Then back to Wembley for Elvis Costello. Then back to Philly for the Hooters. And then it was Nik Kershaw's turn to take to the Wembley stage. But it was what was happening backstage that got him a bit flustered.
Well, my big hero was Bowie. So I'm at Live Aid, and I kind of we all come off stage at the end, and we get thrown into minibuses to go back to the conference centre, which is where all the dressing rooms are. And I'm sitting on this bus, and I'm aware of someone behind me going, "Do they know it's Christmas time?" You know, and I look behind him, and it was him. It was Bowie, and I just my heart sort of, I didn't know what to do. I thought, oh my God, it's Bowie. He's sitting behind me, literally 2 feet away from me. I've got to say something. But the trip was only about 2 minutes, so during which time I hadn't summoned the courage or figured out what the hell I was going to say.
Right.
And he got off the bus, went one way. I got off the bus and went another way. And I thought, that's it. I'm never going to get a chance again, you idiot.
Yeah. And
then about sort of early 90s, I was doing this random TV show in Germany called the Thomas Gott Show, and I was playing with this equally random band. We were supplying the music, but the chat show guest was David Bowie.
Right.
So I didn't know this. So I'm playing, doing rehearsing in the afternoon, and then we leave the rehearsal, and I start walking. I open the door, and there's a corridor, and it's about 30 feet long. The door opens the other end, and in walks these three people, and there's a lady with a quick clipboard. There's this big, huge geezer. And there's Bowie, and they're all coming towards me, and I think, and it's a really narrow corridor, so at some point we're going to have to cross, and we're going to have to, I'm going to have to say something now. You've got another chance. You've got another chance. And I just couldn't do it then either. I just sort of looked at him and went, all right, and then walked past.
I got it back.
Nik Kershaw with Wouldn't It Be Good? Okay, here is a rundown of what happened next on both sides of the Atlantic before we make our next pit stop. Straight after Nik, it was over to Philly for the Four Tops. Then B.B. King was beamed in from Holland. Back to Philly for Billy Ocean. Over to Wembley for Sade. Black Sabbath and Run DMC in Philly. Back to London for Sting and Phil Collins. Over to Philly for Rick Springfield and REO Speedwagon. Then Howard Jones, followed by Brian Ferry in Wembley. Back to Philadelphia for Crosby, Stills and Nash, staying there for a bit of Judas Priest. And then back to Wembley for Paul Young, who brought Alison Moyet on midway through his set. Remind me, where were you in the running order? Who did you go on after and who followed you, kind of thing?
I think you two were on after me because their roadies were sound checking the drums, and it was coming through our foldback system, which meant...
Oh, not helpful.
No, I was trying to sing in time with my band, but I could hear this.
Oh, no.
It was completely out of time with what we were doing, of course.
But it didn't put you off. We would never have known, Paul. You covered it well. That's the Way Love Is from Paul Young and Alison Moyet, who was one of only 3 female artists performing at Wembley that day, the other 2 being Sade and Kiki Dee, who duetted with Elton. Oh, and by the way, Paul Young was right. You two were getting ready to go on during his set, which was totally unnecessary, because after Paul, Bryan Adams played in Philadelphia, which is when you two were supposed to have sound-checked. Anyway, after you two, the Beach Boys played on stage at the JFK Stadium. Then it was back to London for Dire Straits, and we'll be back to hear from them next. Welcome back to the evening show with Jackie Brambles and our continuing celebration of the 38th anniversary of the legendary Live Aid concert, which was the first and is still inarguably the greatest fundraising event in music history. On July 13th, 1985, over 50 artists performed on stage in London and Philadelphia to raise money for famine relief in Africa. Throughout tonight's show, we've taken a time machine to kind of whiz through the day in chronological order, and we're now up to the early evening when it's time for Dire Straits and their good mate Sting to entertain the 75,000 at Wembley and the close to 2 billion TV viewers around the world. Dire Straits keyboardist Alan Clarke explained Live Aid was just one of the shows that they had on their schedule that day. What are your recollections of that, Alan? What's your story of the day?
My story of the day is I woke up in an apartment in Bayswater, and Dire Straits was actually in a run of, I think, 12 shows at the Wembley Arena, which is the building
next door.
Next door, yeah. So I'd had a bit of a late night the night before, so I woke up, put the TV on, and Live Aid was just starting to kick in on TV. So I ate breakfast. It was a lovely sunny day.
Yeah,
ate breakfast on the balcony, watching the TV. And watching Live Aid, knowing that I was going to be on that stage at 6 o'clock that afternoon. So I allowed myself a good couple of hours to drive up to Wembley, which was a mistake, actually, because there was nobody on the road because they were already in the stadium. So the roads were pretty much clear. As I was driving up there, we'd arranged to meet at 1 o'clock and have lunch at the arena,
right,
and then walk across to the stadium because we were playing the arena that night also.
Wow!
So basically, we went on stage at 6, played for 40 minutes, came off, walked straight across with a police escort across the car park as Queen were just starting to kick in, and so we could hear Queen in the background. We went into the arena, had dinner, and then went on stage at 8:30 and played for 2 hours, 20 minutes there.
Dire Straits and Sting with Money for Nothing. Straight after them, over in the States, it was George Thorogood and the Destroyers, along with Bo Diddley and Albert Collins, tearing up the stage in Philadelphia. Then, of course, as Alan Clarke said, it was Queen. After Queen, the video of Bowie and Jagger singing Dancing in the Streets was played. Then it was back to Philly for Simple Minds, over to Wembley for David Bowie, back to JFK Stadium for The Pretenders. The Who then reunited on the Wembley stage, back to Philly for Santana. And then at this point, Phil Collins got interviewed on Concorde as he's en route to Philadelphia to play there, having done his Wembley set. Then we had Elton, who brought on Kiki Dee and George Michael with Andrew Ridgeley on backing vocals. Then back to Philly for 3 acts in a row. Ashford and Simpson, Kool and the Gang, and Madonna, who brought a couple of guests on stage with her. The Thompson Twins, as you may have heard in Monday night's great conversation with Tom Bailey of the Thompson Twins, and also her producer, Nile Rodgers.
The best part of Live Aid for me was not performing. The best part of Live Aid for me was backstage meeting all of these people who were my heroes and having them actually know who I was. That freaked me out. When Joan Baez walked up to me and said, "Hi, Nile Rodgers," I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And Richie Havens and people were like, I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" And then when we did We Are the World, and I'm standing next to Eric Clapton. Now, of course, Eric and I had been friends. Before that, I had produced an album, but of his. But still, to think that you're standing on stage in front of, about 100,000 people, and you're standing there next to Eric Clapton, that's some pretty amazing stuff. And of course, the great Madonna saying, "I ain't taking off today."
And it was Bette Midler who gave Madonna the opportunity to clarify what she was and wasn't taking off that day. This is back in Madonna's early days, remember, when she was pretty new to the scene and considered highly controversial and risque. Madonna, along with Nile Rodgers and the Thompson Twins, Love Makes the World Go Round. Next at around 9:45 p.m, almost 3 hours after Queen's blistering set, Freddie Mercury and Brian May, if you remember, returned to the stage to perform with just Brian's acoustic guitar and Freddie's voice. He quietened the crowd down and they performed a very moving song that they'd written just for the occasion called Is This the World We Created, which then segued beautifully into Paul McCartney coming on to do Let It Be, and then into the finale with everybody on stage singing Do They Know It's Christmas. The London show was over just after 10 o'clock, and Philadelphia continued with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, then Kenny Loggins, the Cars, Neil Young, Power Station, the Thompson Twins, whose performance you may have heard earlier this week on Monday's Great Conversation with Tom Bailey, then Eric Clapton, followed by Phil Collins, hot from his Concorde flight, to be followed by a Led Zeppelin reunion. Crosby, Stills and Nash came back out again with Neil Young in tow this time, and then it was the turn of Duran Duran. Over to Simon Le Bon.
I remember it very clearly indeed. It was a long day. I'd lost my voice during rehearsal. I was terrified for the entire time. I was really scared that I might lose my voice at the end of View to a Kill. And guess what happened? I lost my voice at the end of View to a Kill.
Oh.
There was a lot of amazing things happened. I remember. I think it was one of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. It wasn't Neil Young. It's like sort of putting his head through the curtains, going, "Will you guys shut up?" Because somebody was doing some tuning checks and things. Led Zeppelin with Phil Collins, extraordinary, and it was a real momentous event. And of course, I had my new girlfriend with me, Yasmin Parvaneh.
And that all went quite well, didn't it, in the end?
It was fantastic, yeah.
That's a pretty good date. That's a pretty good date location if you want to go impress someone.
It was like our sort of, I don't know, it's like our third or fourth date, actually.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's a whole nother ball game.
Duran Duran, led by a rather hoarse Simon Le Bon, bless him, but what a phenomenal job he did with a voice he was barely clinging onto with View to a Kill, which, coincidentally, on that very day, was #1 in the Billboard charts in America. After Duran Duran, there was a quick diversion back to Wembley, but to a room backstage, which had Cliff Richard singing an acoustic number, before the action resumed in Philadelphia with Patti LaBelle, Hall & Oates, Mick Jagger, who was then joined by Tina Turner, and the final act that night was Bob Dylan with Ronnie Wood and Keith Richards, before the American contingent finished off the marathon day with their grand finale of We Are the World. But let's leave the final memory of that special Live Aid day to one of our own, the late, great, dearly missed Janice Long.
I remember looking out from backstage as they opened the gates, and it was a trickle, and it just got bigger. The amount of people got bigger and bigger and bigger as they ran. They were trying to get to the front, but of course they had, the picnic bags and the bottles of water and what have you. And then before you knew it, the whole place was full. But it was just the buzz, as you can imagine, backstage, huge flight cases arriving, various artists arriving and sitting around in the Hard Rock Cafe, and the momentum. It was just like, oh my goodness, this is for real. And of course we were hearing stories, we knew it was happening in Philadelphia, but that everywhere was virtually closing down to watch Live Aid. Christmas time.
Do They Know It's Christmas, sung by everybody on stage and in the audience at Wembley Stadium and around the world in their own homes. I hope you enjoyed reliving that day as much as I have loved it.